Disclaimer. This book may contain content that is considered historically inaccurate or culturally insensitive by modern standards. My hope is that by exploring old literature, we will better understand why people of the past thought the way that they did and understand the influences that shape their culture. This video is not intended for young audiences. Content warning. This chapter is very heavy on the period-typical racism, as well as less than ideal treatment of animals. Listen at your own risk. Hi, I'm Morgan, and today I'm excited to read to you from Out of Door Book, which is the 7th book in a series or collection of books called The Children's Hour, which were published by Houghton Mifflin Co. in 1907. My Escape from the Patagonians by Benjamin Franklin Bourne. The chief came home from the council full of the proposed visit to the little island called Holland. He was in royal good humor, and talked about it half the night, but several objections arose which it was necessary for me to dispose of. These were met, apparently to his full satisfaction. One of the most serious was the fear that the white men would revenge upon him the murder of Captain Eaton. I assured him that so long as I was with him, he had nothing to fear on that score. The people were all mine, and would do, or refrain from doing, whatever I should bid them. They would not dare to lift their hands against him contrary to my orders, or refuse to deliver what articles I chose to demand. Nothing, I found, would do, but the assertion of absolute supremacy over all white men whatever, the world round. Less than this would not secure the confidence of these savages, and I regulated my speech by the necessities of the case. The chief inquired, half a dozen times over, what I would say to the white men, and I as often rehearsed an address for the occasion. At last his curiosity seemed abated, and we fell asleep. Early the next morning we were up and stirring, and the chief, having adjusted his toilette with care, a slight breakfast was made ready. This over, His Highness made an official address to the tribe, wherein he set out the advantages of a visit to Holland, and suggested the most expedient style of making it. He advised that a few only of the tribe should be deputed with himself to accompany me, and receive the stores of rum, tobacco, bread, rice, tea, butter, beads, brass, copper, and so forth, that were to be forthcoming, as the expression of my gratitude for the distinguished consideration with which they had treated me. Though royal speeches seldom excite any jealousy of plagiarism, and it may seem a little captious on my part to make such a charge, it is due to the truth of history to declare that herein the great Parasilver did but repeat a suggestion which he did me the honor to receive with favor overnight. It was not deemed essential to the case to inform His Highness of all the reasons that led me to wish for as small an escort as the nature of the business would admit. On the contrary, acting upon the profound maxim that one sufficient reason is as good as a dozen, and better than that number of questionable ones, I merely advised that, after the experience which Captain Eaton and others had had of Patagonian prowess, the sight of too many of his giants would frighten away the whites, and prevent all beneficial communication with them, while the presence of a small deputation would be a pledge of their pacific inclinations. The speech from the throne proved less moving than most of the chief's effusions. His lieges listened with great interest, and an earnest debate sprung up, at the conclusion of which it was decided that the chief, with 4 other Indians and their squaws, should be my bodyguard, the rest of the tribe to follow after. Another old woman begged to go with us, which was agreed to. The horse I had been in the habit of riding was lame and unfit for service. Another was procured for me. Our simple preparations for departure were soon made, and as we were about to start, they all began bringing their dirty children to me, and requesting that I would bring brass and beads for them all, which was gravely promised, much to their satisfaction. There remained the last act in the comedy for which I had been long rehearsing, if indeed it did not turn out a tragedy. The idea had early occurred to me that if I had some object to which I appeared very much attached, it might prove to be for my advantage. The Indians might hold it, in my absence at any time, as a sort of surety for my return. A belle from among the beauties of the tribe would be effectual to that end, but if no sentiments of virtue had restrained me from this expedient, the filth and unsightliness of them all were enough to ensure continence. I chose, therefore, a little white dog for a pet, a dirty, thievish little rascal, but I fondled him in the style proper to a violent attachment. It is true that when I saw him licking the meat designed for our repast, it was not easy to refrain from kicking his worthless brains out, but this was a trifle to other things I had to endure, and I made myself apparently so fond of him that the reality of the case was never suspected. Now and then I indemnified myself by giving him, when unobserved, a smart rapping for his misdeeds, though such chastisement made but a slight impression on the object of it. As we were about setting out, I was asked if I intended to take my dog. No, I told them, he would be better off there, and when I returned he should have some bread and other dainties to eat. The ruse more than answered its expected end, in lulling all suspicion of my insincerity. At last we were under way. The grand crisis to which all my diplomacy and the utmost license of fiction had tended was near at hand. A strong hope of deliverance braced my spirits, shaded, it is true, by a natural apprehension of possible failure, and of the consequences that might follow, with no great elation of spirits, but with a stern, severe tension of all my mental energies, and a concentration of them into one focus of resolve. I waved a farewell which I hoped might be everlasting to the accursed gang of robbers who tormented me so many tedious weeks. Goodbye to Patagonia, I mentally ejaculated, and struck off with my escort, but had not gone more than an eighth of a mile, when the party wheeled about and ordered me to follow them back to the camp. I remonstrated, but it was of no use, and with a heavy heart I found myself once more in my dirty corner of a wigwam. The horses were turned adrift without a word of explanation, and the Indians sat down to a game of cards, with as much indifference to everything else as if the events of the past 48 hours had been a feverish dream. What could be the meaning of it? I questioned the chief. He merely replied that he would go by and by, which, being interpreted, probably meant when he pleased, and that convenient season might never arrive. After I had teased him for a long time, he took me to the door of the lodge, and, pointing to the river, said it was no good then. It would be good at night. What the state of the river, which was a shallow stream, a branch of the Santa Cruz, had to do with the matter I could not divine, and was half inclined to vote myself fairly outwitted by the old boy. The day, a long one, at last wore off, and at night we were once more set off. We crossed the frozen marsh, and forded the river, and, after going about 2 miles, stopped for repose. We took no camp equipage, and had to shelter ourselves for the night under the lee of a clump of bushes. We thrust our feet into the thicket, while our heads lodged out of doors. In this interesting attitude I was made to repeat my wearisome detail of promises, and to rehearse once more my contemplated speech to the white men, which done, we dropped asleep. Waking early the next morning, I found my head and shoulders covered with a fleecy mantle of snow. Would the fortune of my expedition fall as lightly on me? I shook it off, turned up my coat collar, pulled my poor, more than half worn-out cap over my ears, and so, partially protected from the storm, rolled over and again sunk into a slumber. The storm ceased at dawn of day. I rose and went in search of fuel, while my dark companions still slept profoundly. In an hour or two they roused themselves and kindled a fire. Meat from a store brought along for our provision on the way was cooked and served with breakfast. The scanty meal being dispatched, our horses were driven in, lassoed, mounted, and we resumed our journey in a southeasterly direction. At the end of about 3 miles, another halt was called. A fire was built to warm by, and the horses were watered. The order of arrangements was discussed, and a fresh edition of the promises and the speech critically listened to. Changing our course a little to the right, we soon struck the Santa Cruz. The Indians pointed far down the stream and said, "There is Holland." I strained my eyes in the direction pointed out, and thought I could discern an island with several small huts upon it. A mile or two farther on the north bank brought us to the mouth of the river, in prospect of the Atlantic. The island was directly opposite the mouth, and the lower part only appeared to be inhabited. We halted. The Indians pointed towards it, exclaiming, "Esta Holland, Sarvi, muchas cosas, mucho hombres, tiene mucho aguardiente, mucho trabajo, Urian, Arnar, arose." This is Holland, and has plenty of houses, and abundance of men, plenty of rum, tobacco, bread, tea, flour, and rice. I surveyed the spot in silence. This island was of considerable extent, lying 2/3 across the wide mouth of the river, its surface dotted over with little knolls or hillocks of earth. Could it be that these were dwellings inhabited by white men? Our horses' heads were now turned from the shore, and we rode back about 1/8 of a mile to a large clump of bushes, unsaddled our beasts, and waited some time for the rest of our company, who had fallen in the rear. They came at last. Our horses were turned adrift, fire was lighted, and, as the day was far spent, supper was in order. Then ensued a repetition, a final one, I trusted, of the grand present to be levied on the Hollanders, and of the speech which was to draw them out. The Indians arranged that I was to hoist the English flag, the colors of the unfortunate brig Avon, which they had brought along at my request, and then to walk the shore to attract the attention of the islanders. On the approach of a boat, I was to be kept back from the beach, to prevent escape, for I found that they were not, after all, as well assured of my good faith as might have been desirable. They thought, moreover, that when the white men saw a prisoner with them, they would come ashore to parley, and offer presents to effect his release. In that case, there might be a chance, if the negotiation proved unsatisfactory, to take bonds of fate in the form of another captive or two. So, at least there was ground to suspect, and some cause to fear that the rascals might prove too shrewd for all of us. After talking to a late hour, the Indians threw themselves upon the ground, stuck their feet into the bushes, and were soon fast asleep. I consulted the chief as to the propriety of modifying this arrangement by placing our heads rather than our feet under cover, since both could not be accommodated. He declined any innovations, and told me to go to sleep. I stretched myself on the ground, but as to sleep, that was out of the question. I lay all night, thinking over all possible expedients for escape. We had no materials for a boat or raft of any description, and it was impossible to think of any plan that promised success, so that, after tossing, in body and mind, through the weary hours of night, I could only resolve to wait the course of events, and to take advantage of the first opportunity affording a reason. My apologies, I'm having trouble with the page. And to take advantage of the first opportunity affording a reasonable hope of deliverance from this horrid captivity. Snow, sleet, and rain fell during the night, and I rose early, thoroughly chilled, every tooth chattering. A fire was kindled, and the last morsel of meat that remained to us was cooked and eaten. The weather continued squally till the middle of the afternoon. After breakfast, the chief went with me to the shore, bearing the flag. On the beach I found a strip of thick board, to which I fastened the colors, and then planted it in the sand. The bushes around, which have a kind of oily leaf and readily ignite, were set on fire. I then walked the beach, but no boat came. When it cleared up sufficiently to see, I observed little objects moving about on the island. The day wore away with fruitless attempts to attract their attention. With an aching heart, I returned at dark to the camping ground. On this island my hopes had so long centered. If they were now to be disappointed, how could I endure it? The Indians began to talk of rejoining the tribe the following day. I opposed the motion with all dissuasives at command, assuring them that, at sight of our flag, the islanders would surely come over in a boat, and that, if they would only wait a little, they could go over to the island and enjoy themselves to their heart's content, representing the absolute necessity that I should procure the rum, etc., we had talked of, and how embarrassing it would be to go back to the tribe empty-handed, after all that had been said, to be ridiculed and reproached. It would never do. Our conversation was continued till quite late, when we ranged ourselves, hungry and weary, for another night. For hours I was unable to sleep. The uncertainties of my situation oppressed me, and I lay restless, with anxiety inexpressible, inconceivable by those whom Providence has preserved from similar straits. It was a season of deep, suppressed, silent misery, in which the heart found no relief but in mute supplication to him who was alone able to deliver. Towards morning, exhausted with the intensity of emotion acting on an enfeebled body, I slept a little, and woke at early dawn to a fresh consciousness of my critical position. The weather had been fair during the night, but there were now indications of another snowstorm. I waited long and impatiently for my companions to awake, and at last started off in quest of fuel, on returning with which they bestirred themselves and started a fire, which warmed our half-benumbed limbs. There lay the little island, beautiful to eyes that longed, like mine, for a habitation of sympathizing men, about a mile and a half distant. It almost seemed to recede while I gazed, so low had my hopes sunken, under the pressure of disappointment and bitter uncertainty. A violent snowstorm soon setting in, it was hidden from view. Everything seemed to be against me. It slackened and partially cleared up. Then came another gust, filling the air, shutting up the prospect. In this way it continued till past noon. At intervals, as the sky lighted up, I took a firebrand and set fire to the bushes on the beach, and then hoisted the flag again, walking wearily to and fro, till the storm ceased and the sky became clear. The chief concealed himself in a clump of bushes, and sat watching, with cat-like vigilance, the movement of the islanders. After some time, he said a boat was coming. I scarcely durst look in the direction indicated, lest I should experience a fresh disappointment. Then I did look, and saw, to my great joy, a boat launched, with 4 or 5 men on board, and pushing off the shore. On they came. The chief reported his discovery, and the rest of the Indians came to the beach, where I was still walking backward and forward. The boat approached, not directly off where I was, but 1/8 of a mile, perhaps, to the windward, and there lay on her oars. Oh, here's an illustration that says, I set off at a full run towards the boat. The Indians hereupon ordered me to return to the camping ground, but, without heeding them, I set off at a full run towards the boat. They hotly pursued, I occasionally turning and telling them to come on. I only wanted to see the boat. Stop! Stop! They bawled. No, my legs, said I. If ever you want to serve me, this is the time. I had one advantage over my pursuers. My shoes, though much the worse for wear, protected my feet from the sharp stones, which cut theirs at every step. But, under all disadvantages, I found they made about equal speed with myself. As I gained a point opposite the boat, the Indians slackened their speed, and looked uneasily at me. The man in the stern of the boat hailed me, inquiring what Indians these were, what number of them, and how I came among them. I replied in as few words as possible, and told him we wished to cross to the island. He shook his head. They were bad fellows, he said. He could not take me with the Indians. They began to pull away. I made signs of distress, and waved them to return, shouting to them through my hands. The boat was again backed within hailing distance. Will you look out for me if I come by myself? Yes, was the prompt reply. The Indians, all this time, had kept within 10 or 15 feet of me, with their hands on their knives, and reiterating their commands to come back, at the same time edging towards me in a threatening manner. Yes, I told them, in a moment, but I wanted to look at the boat, taking care, however, to make good my distance from them. At the instant of hearing the welcome assurance that I should be cared for, I drew out the watch, which I had brought, according to promise, to have a new crystal inserted at Holland, and threw it into the bushes. The salt water would spoil it, and if I should be retaken, the spoiling of that would be an aggravation which might prove fatal. At the same moment I gave a plunge headlong into the river. My clothes and shoes encumbered me, and the surf, agitated by a high wind, rolled in heavy seas upon the shore. The boat was 40 or 50 yards off, and, as the wind did not blow square and shore, drifted so as to increase the original distance, and thus counteracted by the crew. Whether the boat was backed up towards me, I could not determine. My head was a great part of the time under water, my eyes blinded with the surf, and most strenuous exertion was necessary to live in such a sea. As I approached the boat, I could see several guns pointed apparently at me. Perhaps we had misunderstood each other. Perhaps they viewed me as an enemy. In fact, they were aimed to keep the Indians from following me into the water, which they did not attempt. My strength was fast failing me. The man at the helm, perceiving it, stretched out a rifle at arm's length. The muzzle dropped into the water, and arrested my feeble vision. Summoning all my remaining energy, I grasped it, and was drawn towards the boat. A sense of relief shot through and revived me, but revived also such a dread lest the Indians should give chase that I begged them to pull away. I could hold on. The man reached down and seized me by the collar, and ordered his men to ply their oars. They had made but a few strokes, when a simultaneous cry burst from their lips. "Pull the dear man in! Pull the dear man in!" They let fall all their oars, laid hold of me, and, in their effort to drag me over the side of their whaleboat, I received some injury. I requested that they would let me help myself, and, working my body up sufficiently to get one knee over the gunwale, I gave a spring that, with what strength was left me, and fell into the bottom of the boat. They kindly offered to strip me and put on dry clothes, but I told them if they would only work the boat farther from the shore, I would take care of myself. They pulled away, while I crawled forward, divested myself of my coat, and put on one belonging to one of the crew. Conversation, which was attempted, was impossible. It was one of the coldest days of a Patagonian winter. I was chilled through, and could only articulate, I can't talk now. I'll talk by. Some liquor, bread, and tobacco, which had been put on board for my ransom, on supposition that this was what the signal meant, were produced for my refreshment. The seas were heavy, with a strong head wind, so that, though the men toiled vigorously, her progress was slow. I was soon comfortably warmed by the stimulants provided, and offered to lend a hand at the oar, but the offer was declined. The shouts and screams of the Indians, which had followed me into the water, and rung hideously in my ears while struggling for life in the surf, were kept up till distance made them inaudible. Whether they found the watch, whose mysterious tick had once awed and delighted them, and restored it to its place of state in the chief's lodge, or whether it still lies resting in the sands by the seashore, is a problem unsolved. The boat at last grounded on the northern shore of the island. Mr. Hall, the gentleman who commanded the party, supported my tottering frame in landing, and, as we stepped upon the shore, welcomed me to their island. I grasped his hand, and stammered my thanks for this deliverance, and lifted a tearful eye to heaven, in silent gratitude to God. I was then pointed to a cabin nearby, where a comfortable fire was ready for me. Now, I heard Mr. Hall say, let us fire a salute of welcome to the stranger. Make ready, present, fire. Off went all their muskets, and a very cordial salute it appeared to be. He soon followed me, took me to his own dwelling, supplied me with dry clothing, and, above all, warmed me in the kindly glow of as generous a heart as ever beat in a human bosom. I was captured by the savages on the 1st of May, and landed upon the island on the 7th of August. And that is the end of my Escape from the Patagonians by Benjamin Franklin Bourne. And also here is the illustration again in case you wanted to take a closer look at it. Thank you for listening to this reading video, and I hope you have a great day. Bye!